what do you think is there to explore in depth in game design and literature and beyond? Like, what attracts you to it?
It's funny. I don't know why people keep asking me this question.
Oh no!
It's not like this is my third game on death. I think death is fascinating, right? It's also terrifying, and I think this partially comes from, like, I'm a horror writer particularly, and I'm gravitated towards writing about things that scare me because I find terror and fear a really interesting emotional landscape because it is so varied and so complex and whatever. I could talk about horror forever, right? But I think, like, with death particular, like, no one death is ever the same, and you never experience two deaths the same way. Like, it's always such a unique experience.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Game Developer Podcast. I'm your host, Senior Editor Bryant Francis. Today, we're talking to Soft Rain studio head Joel Burgess and lead narrative designer Kait Tremblay about their upcoming game, Ambrosia Sky. In this game, players take on the role of Dahlia, a professional scarab who cleans up fungus-ridden corridors and lays rest to the dead in the far reaches of space. Full disclaimer, I've been friends with Kait for, 10 years, ever since we both started writing about video games. Kait still does that, by the way. She's writing a book about Dontnod's Life is Strange for Boss Fight Books. Meanwhile, Joel is a legendary level designer who began his career at Bethesda, made his way up to Canada for a stint at companies like Ubisoft, and now leads Soft Rains, which he co-founded with Kait and their peers Matt Scott, Jules Clegg, and Daryl Brigner. Games like Ambrosia Sky let us expand the conversation about how and why we make games. How do we create unique styles of gameplay without mindlessly aping what's popular in the market? How can we make truly science fiction video games without relying on the genre's tropes? And how can we do all that while building stable studios? Kait and Joel don't have all the answers, but they've got some good ones. And hopefully they'll inspire you to keep pushing boundaries in your own work so you can make truly one-of-a-kind games. All right, Kait, Joel, welcome to the Game Developer Podcast. It's so nice to have you on today.
Thank you. Yeah. Excited.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Let's start talking about why we're here, obviously, which is Ambrosia Sky. This is the first game from Soft Rains, and you guys seem really excited about it. It's unique. It's kind of merging a popular genre on Steam with something really artful and compelling. Would you both mind sort of telling me how this idea came together and what we're sort of like? Where did this all start for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, we got the studio started a few years ago, and even in those early stages, we're just kind of like looking around the room at like who we were, our sensibilities, our experience, and like what we wanted to do. And given a lot of the way that we think about games is we started thinking a lot about like character and themes and world building and the kind of storytelling we wanted to do. And that was really fun and exciting, and it sort of generated, the technical word is a mishmash of just different things we thought might be interesting to do. So honestly, like in those earliest stages, it's not like we sat down like, hey, we're gonna make a power wash sim thing with like some first person adventure immersive sim elements. We had an idea of the character, and we had an idea that this like cleaning gameplay might be a thing we could prototype, and then like through prototype that really clicked, and that helped kind of focus us over the the following months and years, honestly, of development and prototyping into what we actually have today.
Yeah, and from a narrative and world perspective too, like I think we really thought a lot about the genre, right? And what does it mean to make a sci-fi game? And what do we care about when we think about sci-fi video games? And what do we care about when we think about sci-fi generally, right? And so a lot of that kind of early work was us interrogating what do we like from the genre? What are we interested in doing from the genre? And thinking a lot about, like the kind of contemporary concerns that we felt equipped to then bring into this future-facing world and this fictional setting and kind of grapple with there. And so a lot of the early conversations, particularly for me, was around, like our relationship to genre and what does that mean for both like story and game design.
That's interesting. Could you, Kait, or both of you, I guess, could you sort of elaborate on like what does genre mean for game design, right? Because I think we sort of can say science fiction is a common setting in games, and we use it to justify, powers or settings, that may not, map to the real world. But it sounds like you guys were digging into this not just from a art direction, not just from a narrative side, but but the play itself. Could you dig into that for me? I'd love to hear more of your thoughts there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go first, Joel. Yeah, I think a lot about like how games actually contend with a lot of different types of genre, right? Like you have your game genre, which is like first-person shooter, platformer, puzzler, etc., etc. But then you also have your literary genre at the same time, right? And so it's like sci-fi, fantasy, comedy, noir, a whole bunch of different types of genre, right? And so for me, the really fun part about being a game developer and a writer is like figuring out how those two things speak to each other and kind of like what affordances they bring at the same time, right? So thinking about like a first-person exploration genre that meets like a kind of like cosmic sci-fi genre, like what do those things offer each other, right? And that kind of really let us think a lot about like exploration and the role of the ecosystem here and how the player responds to it and what the player can do and the kind of ways in which the gameplay around cleaning and discovery and movement can kind of really reinforce this kind of like almost like fantastical cosmic sci-fi element. And so just thinking about like, yeah, those kind of genre affordances and what they're saying to each other and where you kind of naturally see fits.
Yeah, and I think I can add that too, because I think this is like, you know, gameplay and world and setting like are intertwined, right? Like I think, well, hopefully they are, right? I think it's a lot harder to make a game where they're not. So like for me, right, like, you know, Kait, we talked about this a lot early on. Like my perspective on like a lot of sci-fi in games is like it can be really, really driven by a nostalgia for what the literary genre was doing 30 years ago. You know, so we got a lot of like really wonderful sci-fi games, but they're referencing things from older at this point sci-fi. And I think what makes some old, like particularly like speculative sci-fi compelling was how much it spoke to like contemporaneous, you know, fears and anxieties and stresses at that time. So it's like we centered like sci-fi was never really the debate. You know, we knew we were making a sci-fi game, I think, really early on. So yeah, it was this question of like, what do we think sci-fi can and should mean in games, and like what themes are contemporaneous now, right? For like a new sci-fi universe, a new sci-fi story that is not like a retelling or a love letter to something older. And I always like think about storytelling, you know, because the actual like hands-on work that I've typically done is like, you know, level building, implementing mechanics, you know, like those kinds of things. But by having multiple layers of world building in my head when I'm doing those things, it informs a lot of like little micro decisions. It makes me feel like more comfortable in what I'm expressing and what I'm doing. And so then it gets into, you know, like, how do we then make the game design experience similarly a thing that is like interested in modernity and not just nostalgia, right? And that's, I think, one of the things that's like really validated the like embrace of job sim and cleaning and washing stuff as well. Because, you know, when you strip back and you look at like our game, like when we were revealing the game and doing interviews and like pitching the game, I explicitly avoided the phrase immersive sim, right? Like I didn't want to say immersive sim. It's a pretty niche term. It's not immediately obvious what it means if you don't already know, sort of thing. So it's like, I'm not going to say immersive sim. And what I found is like sitting down with people and playing the game and players playing the game and commenting on it without, you know, a soft drains person sitting next to them, like they would say, oh, I'm surprised how much this is like an immersive sim. I was expecting it to be like a job simulator, but it's actually this other thing in reverse. And I think that that's sort of an interesting, like, how should we talk about the game expressing it? It's sort of like an interesting, like, I don't know, marketing problem for us, marketing opportunity for us. But I also just like, as a game designer, take it as like a pretty solid validation of like, okay, cool. We have merged the like, you know, nostalgia versus modernity thing, both in how we're like crafting this world and then how we're allowing the player to interact with that world. So it's not nostalgic for immersive sims of 20 years ago in the same way that's not just nostalgic for, you know, speculative sci-fi of 30, 40 years ago.
I know what cosmic sci-fi is, but our audience doesn't know, and I'm definitely not lying when I say that. So would you guys mind defining what cosmic sci-fi means for you?
Yeah, for me, cosmic sci-fi is a type of like almost mythological sci-fi that contends with this idea of grandiosity and how much bigger and more unknown life is, and it kind of deals with a more metaphysical kind of fear, a lot more that kind of like existential fear. It does have its grounding in, you know, science, like most sci-fi does, but it uses that as a springboard rather than guardrails, in my experience, or at least how I'm using it. And it really does kind of let you contend with this kind of like more grand, more metaphysical, more terror in the universe. I think it aligns sci-fi a little bit closer to horror in that sense, where you get a lot more of the like fear and terror of the unknown and kind of what could be lurking out there.
Yeah. In this case, in your game, it sort of has to do with the material and the material cleaning up in the space vessel that you're on, as well as sort of the connection with death and the unknown of space. Those are all some of the themes that twine together around that, right? Yeah, definitely. And also like how we as people respond to life in situations where we don't fully understand everything that's happening around us, right? Like it's a big thing for me with this game too, is like how can I integrate like folklore and how people respond to the unknown into the writing, into how the characters reacted, into how the world kind of like feels and speaks. So. Yeah, Joel, kind of on this, bringing this topic to your direction, sometimes when I really enjoy a game, or when I'm really like, enjoying a game, playing in this space, playing with interesting concepts, sometimes I struggle with, these concepts might only be coming out through the audio logs, right? Or through art direction. We sort of talked a minute ago about like bringing genre, how it helps you, in the nuts and bolts, like, hands in the engine kind of work. But I guess with some of the concepts Kait's talking about, like sort of how do you feel that, I guess especially, the relationship with death, with like, treating dead bodies with care, like sort of how do you sort of feel that has fit into your work as a game designer here?
Yeah. And it dawns on me that like I should probably kind of pitch the game for listeners who don't already know it, right? So Ambrosia Sky is like this first-person immersive adventure clean 'em up game, and the character you play is what's known as a scarab. Right? So you play Dahlia, who's a scarab, and scarabs are these sort of disaster cleanup specialists, but they're principally concerned with gathering samples from dead bodies for this Ambrosia project, so Ambrosia Sky, Ambrosia project, right? So that underlies kind of everything I think about it, like as a level designer, right? Like when you're in the space and what you're doing, and then as a game designer, part of the creative team overall. So like at the end of, there was a demo that we launched that was available during Next Fest last month. And at the end of that demo, you have one of these death rites where you actually are interacting with somebody who's passed on, and you get this whole sequence, and we'll probably talk about those sequences through this. But along the way to get there, like, what are you doing and why are you doing it? It's a thing that, like, as a level designer, like, hey, that's like a big part of my job, right? And want players to be thinking about that as well. And this kind of goes back to, like, why are we even exploring some of these themes? Like, okay, like the premise of the game is that humanity found edible fungus that was growing in the rings of Saturn, on these like asteroids in the rings of Saturn. And that's why like the colony was set up. Okay, cool. Check. That's sort of an interesting thing. You were born here and like left, and you became a scarab, and you're called back home because like something has gone wrong and this fungus is growing everywhere. And so the fungus is this thing that your character has a familiarity with, but then like it is the obstacle. It is the environment is the enemy. So like moment to moment, we're thinking about like, okay, how does this stuff behave? Like, how do we design the system of like how it's getting in your way? Does it feel sentient? Is it sentient? Do we actually like clarify that to the player or not? And this is all like thematic stuff. But then again, like, okay, I'm going to trigger some fungus to like interfere with an electrical system so I can create a cool puzzle that uses our electrical systems, right? Mm-hmm. As like a level design progression thing. But it also taps into that like, oh, this stuff grows here, and like maybe it kind of feels sentient, but that's not super clear. It's also like fungus, and we're dealing in this game about like death, and like there's a really interesting question of like fungus's role in decay, and the fact that like, mycelium and mycorrhizal networks are things that like it's like a form of life we still don't really understand. So you get these layers of like, superficially I'm using this chemical sprayer and I'm like cleaning this fungus, and that gives me like gameplay setups, but then like really deeply rooted in the themes of like death and why this colony exists and like contemporaneous sci-fi, like everything all like kind of clicks together. And it problematically for like a podcast makes it hard to like talk about it in like a clean way, but beautifully as like a cohesive experience, it just entangles everything, right? Like game mechanics, the moment-to-moment progression, storytelling systems are all really, really integrated and knotted together.
Yeah. For the listeners, normally I save the part where I say you should just go check out the Ambrosia Sky. I mean, either the trailer, I guess the demo's not online anymore. Normally I say that till the end, but to help Joel out there, if you need to pause and go look up and sort of see how the player gets to interact with all that fungus, hey, now's a good time. I don't mind. I think I really love games like this myself. I think there's this amazing tension in our medium where video games at the historic level are treated as a huge commercial product, where a lot of people from all the way back to asteroids have sort of looked at the process of making games and gone, no, there's like a little bit of myself I want to put in here. Famously, asteroids, no, it's Missile Command. Shoot, Missile Command. I mean, maybe asteroids too. I just haven't read about it. Missile Command is a game where the person who made it, I forget his name, talked about, like it's a game where you defend your cities from incoming missiles. And he sort of talked about, waking up in a cold sweat some nights because he pictured those cities as, the Bay Area around him in kind of a late Cold War era. But as games have evolved, we've gotten more games that have been able to lean into that sense, but also we've had to wrangle with, hey, how do you turn these games into something that can fund a studio, that can keep a team going? So as you guys have sort of started your journey here and figuring out, this is the game you want to make, you think this is the game you can bring to players, that players will resonate with it enough to help you guys keep going. How have you sort of navigated that? Like made sure, you're keeping in the realm of like, I don't know. How have you balanced that like contradiction? I guess I think every studio grapples with it in some way, but for such a creative project like this, I think that question must come up more often.
Yeah, it is a. I don't know if paradox is exactly the right way. There's a tension there for sure.
Contradiction. I like the word contradiction. Like I love an infinite contradiction to me. It's not going away. It's just there. Like that's one of my ways of talking about it.
Yeah. I mean, we're at a scale of game development, which like. I've phrased it this way to folks. We're big and we're small. Like we're big enough to be in a scary situation. We're small enough to be in a scary situation, right? Like, yeah, like our game does need to find an audience of a certain scale in order to like ensure commercial success, right? But our game is not so big, right? And our team is not so big that it necessarily gets out of our grasp. And like we started a new independent studio to make a weird project. So there's also like sort of a step when we talk about working with anybody of like, we are like inviting, whether you're a programmer or a producer or an artist or a design, like inviting you to bring a lot of yourself into the game, because I think it just makes better art. And I also like, I think it makes you want to do better work when you can see yourself, like your experience and your influence in your work like reflected in what you do. So I think that was like foundationally really important to like why we started Soft Drains and the way that we started Soft Drains. And so then you get into that, I kind of like the thrust of the question that I think you have here of like, how do we sort of validate that the thing we're making is the right thing? There's sort of like a great myth in the games business. I would probably guess any creative medium that anybody knows what the hell they're doing. When it comes to like picking projects, right? Like you get these folks who are really good at consistently picking a hit or whatever. But for the most part, we're all guessing, right? And so like the great myth here is that like you can design by a spreadsheet and guarantee success before you actually start ideation. So I'll say like quite honestly, quite transparently, like I didn't know and I wasn't sure, right? If we're making the best or the right thing for the market, which of course the market in 2022 and the market in 2025 are different things. So if I designed the right game for the market in 2022, I'd probably be, in a different and a worse situation in 2025. So we thought a lot more about what we thought was like the game that this team uniquely could make at this time. And then to just kind of like keep an eye on not getting, so like not getting into territory where the burden of success was going to be too high. Right, in order for it to actually be like a piece of art, to actually be an expression of the individuals therein. And now that like we've announced, I'm sorry, Kate. Well, why don't you go ahead? It's sort of a separate thought.
Oh, I was gonna say, yeah, like I think like because it is hard to know, and this is something I take from having worked in book publishing for a while too, which suffers from the same contradiction in terms of like balancing things. Is just like the the clarity of what you're making and why you're making it will translate, right? And I think like for us that was really useful. Is like we knew what we wanted to make, and we knew we wanted to make something that was specifically us and that was specifically this team. And I think and maybe this is a little like artistically whatever of me, but like I do think that like players and audiences do respond to something that is, you know, particularly of the vision you want to make and is centered around, you know, that clarity of intention and intentional designs. And I think that was really rallying too.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'll say, like, and not to cut you off there, Brian, but like just to finish the thought on like a business lens is like, it's not just like an artsy fartsy, we're going to make the thing we want to make just for us thing either. Like this, look, we are in a situation where there are a lot of great games, right, getting made. And there's also like a lot of fear in the industry around what's safe to make, right? And one of the things that like we have tried to embrace about our game is the ways in which it does defy easy categorization, which also means like it defies some of the like easily checked off like risk mitigation factors, right? Like again, going back to like design by spreadsheet, if you were trying to just get a game funded at a certain level, there are certain things you have, depending on what quarter of what year you're pitching, there are certain checkboxes your pitch is supposed to include. And even at the beginning, I mean, I probably was pretty unwise in some of the ways we pitched early on what we wanted to build, because I was like, these, whatever the 3 buzzwords of the month were, like, we're explicitly not doing these things, right? We're going to defy the expectation on us to do those things. And what that meant is we were actually able to like define some clarity of like what we were and were not early on. But I think if you fast forward to the actual climate we exist in now, with all these great games getting made, with this sort of climate, I think what we're seeing is it's extremely competitive, and it's created this sort of like chilling effect. I think it's created a situation where we are going to be competing, you know, it's almost a knock on wood thing, with a lot of games that are going to struggle to stand out in a way that we do stand out, because our game is weird, because our game has a distinct visual and audio direction, because our game's mechanics are coloring outside of the lines of bit. Like, you know, I think being forgettable is death, right? And if nothing else, this game is not forgettable.
Yeah. I have to, like, I really see your point of view there, because when I'm looking for games on Steam between, you know, some of the major releases I'm playing, I might see something that looks like kind of a cool game, but then I look at it for a second, I go, do I really want to play, you know, like another like Space Marine riff, or do I really want to play another, you know, Dungeons and Dragons, downstream fantasy game, you know, like you got with the mage, the warrior, the priest, you know, the cleric. Like there is such an interesting challenge in how do you know, or you guys actually sort of talked about it up top, right? You know, like so many games are built on science fiction from yesteryear, which means they're easy touch points, which means onboarding players so the world is easy, but also when you're playing in that space, you're just like, it's just so easy to, you know, to pass by, and something special about your game that requires playing it, you know, might be so deep in there that it doesn't pop up on the Steam page. Kind of picking down my questions here. Kait, you also, you know, you helped write for the Mortician's Tale before this, with Gabby Dorinzo, hopefully I said her name right, and the other fine folks. What draws you to death? Because, you know, having like known you for a while and talked about it, like I've also really been entranced by how you sort of treat death in your art, and how you sort of like often recommend other people's works about death. So I guess, like, what do you see? What do you think is there to explore in death in game design and literature and beyond? Like, what attracts you to it?
It's funny. I don't know why people keep asking me this question.
Oh no!
It's not like this is my third game on death. I think death is fascinating, right? It's also terrifying, and I think this partially comes from like, I'm a horror writer particularly, and I'm gravitated towards writing about things that scare me because I find terror and fear a really interesting emotional landscape, because it is so varied and so complex, and whatever. I could talk about horror forever, right? But I think like with death particular, like no one death is ever the same, and you never experience two deaths the same way. Like, it's always such a unique experience when you experiencing it. And every time that I've experienced a death and I've read something else about somebody else's, it always feels different, right? It always feels like they haven't captured exactly what I feel when I've felt death, right? And so I think I'm continually fascinated about writing about this topic and reading about this topic and engaging in it. A, because it scares me and I love looking at what scares me. It's comforting being terrified, I guess. But B, because also, like, I'm just constantly seeking to understand how my experiences fit in to my own life, how other people have experienced it. And there is a lot of comfort in kind of sitting in discomfort together and kind of just looking at the scary thing and seeing how other people felt about it and what kind of meaning they attach to it and how it then reflects back into your day-to-day life, right? Like, I remember when we were working on A Mortician's Tale, it was the first time I really learned about death positivity and how it's not really a morbid movement. It is really about, like, understanding what death is, what it means to you, so that your life can be more enriched, or you kind of, you know, like, appreciate each moment more. Like, it really is about life, and how you know, prepare for your death and how you can, like, have that knowledge help embolden your life. So I don't know. I think I'm interested just because it is so unknowable and because it's so complex and because it's never quite the same thing. It's constantly shifting, and kind of, like, I think I'm just always, like, chasing those shifts and, like, what is it that's interesting to me right now, and what is it that's going to be interesting to me, and what is it that's interesting to other people. So I think it's a perennial topic, and I think there's so much to say on it. I think I still have a lot more to say on it as well. So I don't know.
Yeah, Joel, I'm sure sort of those conversations, you know, conversations like that pop up at your studio a lot, you know, like, what is Kait interested in? What are you guys interested in? So I guess, you know, when you, if you can think back to, you know, when you've heard Kait talk about death, what, for you, what made you interested, I guess, in what someone else is interested in, right? Because now this is such a core part of your game that, you know, surely you had to be interested a little bit and not just kind of go, oh yeah, well, that's over there. What has attracted you about the topic since starting to work with, you know, Kait and your other Soft Brains collaborators?
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking here, right, about, like, how different Kait's background and mine are, right? Like, I'm from the US originally and spent the first, you know, like, huge chunk of my career working, like, big AAA open world games tended, like, to define what I was doing. I don't particularly care for horror, as, like, it's not a thing I watch, and it's a thing that I accidentally put Annihilation behind me. I wasn't trying to do placement for a reference, but, like, I don't think of that as horror, right? The film Annihilation, I barely watch because it's just, like, adjacent up to horror. But when Kait and I first came into contact, like, working both at Ubisoft at the same time, I was really struck, you know, in the early stages of working with Kait, of just how, like, not just, like, how, you know, like, broadly talented Kait is, but how Kait, like, throws themselves into really wanting to understand the work, really wanting to learn, and not, like, falling into, I think, kind of like the comfortable creative stagnation that I think people, just generally people can do. I don't think games are special in prompting that kind of, like, comfort. And I think it's a big reason why, like, you know, Kait and I have worked in sequence at, you know, Ubisoft together. We worked at Capybara together. We co-founded Soft Brains together, working on this sort of thing. And, you know, for me, like, in terms of, like, the subject matter, you know, going back to, like, working on Fallout, working on Elder Scrolls stuff. I mean, I think Fallout in particular is, like, an easier touch point for something like Ambrosia. This idea of, like, multiple layers of world building that result in a moment the player experiences, and you're, like, absorbing that storytelling indirectly, like, that is really an integral part of the game for me, right? Like, Kait, and one reason I love being a creative collaborator with Kait so much is, like, I feel like Kait's strengths and my weaknesses, I don't know that Kait has weaknesses, but, like, my weaknesses are overlapped well by Kait's strengths, right? So, like, I'm not really, like, as a writer, I'm not really good at dialogue. I'm not, like, character is not a strong point for me, but I think deeply about setting. I think deeply about, like, sequencing of events. And so, like, even from those early stages of, like, why does this place exist? How many generations of people have lived here? Why was the place that we're exploring built? What has happened here 10 years and 10 minutes before the player arrives? Like, that level of investment in the story requires you to think about history and death and storytelling, and then for the game itself to be, like, an exploration of death and have all this cohesion. Yeah, it's, like, a natural draw to me the historical storytelling point of view.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Kait,
I think.
Dang it, we're doing
really?
that thing. Kait, I was going to say I need to give you 5 minutes to gas up Joel since he just had time to sing your praises.
Yeah, I was going to say, right, I think that, like, that difference is what's really important to how strong of a collaboration relationship we have too, right? It's like, yeah, like I feel like what I'm not as strong in, you are much stronger in, Joel. And I think like we take that mentality as well for the team, right? Like I think difference of experience, different of perspective, different of lived life experience really helps because you can get really excited about things that other people are really good at and really excited about. Like Joel asks me so many good questions about world building that like I never was really excited to answer before. It's like, I don't really care about architecture. What are you talking about? And then like he makes these cases for why architecture is actually really interesting and compelling and sociological and like gets me really hyped up about stuff that I kind of would have not been as hyped up about. And I think that's really important in like a team like ours and a game like ours to have a lot of different perspectives that are challenging and complementing because you're going to bring out better parts of yourselves and you're going to get excited about things that you might not have been excited about but that do make it holistically better. And so I think that complementary strengths and weaknesses is so crucial, especially to something like Ambrosia Sky, which is trying to be really, it's weird. So it's good to have people that have different hyperfixations in order to be able to really lean on each other.
And it's easy because Kait and I are here for us to kind of talk about our collaborative relationship and the impact on the game. But like one of the things about Soft Rains that I think is special and captures some of what I think worked well in Creative Virus in the past is it's not just like Kait and I's relationship really going to create a vision that like everybody's following. Like you can take this out to like, this person on the team and this person on the team and this person on the team and that kind of like sort of like chaotic center, and it is chaotic, right? Like I think it would be a lot easier to make a game where we had like a super clear singular vision holder and we're all kind of like grabbing that banner and marching behind it. But the way we're making this game is chaotic at times and difficult because of that. But it also means that there are huge components of this game that exist and are great that wouldn't exist otherwise because somebody, was comfortable rowing outside of their lane and bringing something to the table and offering to write something or offering to implement something or participating in a brainstorm. That just really makes this game super specific to this group.
Yeah. You both have sort of talked about, like crossing paths, or being at Ubisoft at the same time. Joel, like your background at Bethesda. And I think a lot of our listeners, might either be AAA devs who've struck out on their own, who are unfortunately, are looking for work after the layoffs. So I think there's, like that dynamic of, experienced folks moving in and out of, larger companies to smaller ones. There's so much orbiting around that. The first kind of thought I want to tackle is, obviously AAA has plenty of flaws. There are lots of AAA games I love, to be clear. Like I truly love games from all teams of all sizes, but people leave AAA to get away from some of those flaws, but also when they leave, there is some stuff left behind, right? There are some resources, maybe there's some institutional knowledge that you don't get to tap into anymore. So I guess like, do each of you have something from your days in AAA that like you do look back and go, man, I wish we still had that. Like, oh, we could do this if we still had it, but nope, we're not there, in that state anymore, so we can't do it. Is there anything like that?
I mean, I think on a pure like day-to-day level, like Ubisoft on Watch Dogs Legion, we had a huge writing team, right? Like there was a lot of us, and like it was really awesome to be able to like have other writers to kind of like that are as deep in it and like like in it with you. We've been really fortunate with Ambrosia Sky that like there's a lot of folks on our team who are narratively inclined, like Joel, like others, and I've had the fortune to be able to like bring on consultants and editors and such to kind of come in and help as well. Because right now, like we're a smaller team, and so resourcing has to be, prioritized. And so I think like, yeah, I mean, like the thing that is lovely about AAA is like you are in a big team full of a lot of people with a lot of different, expertise that like you can ask like, hey, how can I punch up this joke specifically? Or how can I like do this thing? Or can I just talk at you for an hour and use your expertise here? That I think is like one of the really great benefits of AAA is just there's so many people around you and who are hyper specialized.
Yeah, and I think in a AAA context, you get, and I would say like it can be a mirage or illusion. Unfortunately, I think people going through layoffs at places that seemed really stable are feeling this in an acute way right now. But you do have this, this illusion again sometimes of stability, where you have the luxury of compartmentalizing and just focusing on your thing, right? You're not worried about how we're going to cut the bill for this thing we have to deploy, because you're just right. You're just a rigger, or you're just this type of level designer, and there are three specialties of level science. You're not even worried about the whole thing. And I think like people who voluntarily leave AAA to go indie, I think there's like a common-ish mistake or fallacy that people get into of like, hey, I'm fleeing AAA, I'm escaping AAA. And I think if you're leaving AAA, particularly if you're making that choice proactively, it's really more about like what challenges you want to embrace. Because to pull on like I think an easy hypothetical is like, I hate that we get so pushed around by like shareholders and marketing, and I wish I could just purely make my thing. And unless you're like one of the odd, like one of my old colleagues, Nate Perkypile, like if you're like an odd duck like Nate who can just go and like rank out a game totally solo, you probably don't have that luxury in reality. If you're going to go indie, you have to actually know more, not less, about marketing, right? And then you're living closer to third rail, man, in every regard, right? Like it's just you can't put your head in the sand and just focus on your thing. And believe me, there are days where I wish I could just only be doing level design and not think about what the market's doing or what the partner update I need to do this afternoon is. The days where I wish I could just focus on that and not feel like, oh crap, I'm behind on a level design task that like people on the team are waiting on me for.
Yeah. Speaking of, actually, there was Joel, you were talking to Stephen Totillo at GameFile, and there was a quote that I read that I was sort of like, I think I know what you're talking about here, but I really wanted to pick your brain about it. You told Steven, some AAA people get some funding and they're going to found a studio to make the game they've always wanted to make, or the same game from last studio for better. The second instance is sort of clear to me, right? Because you have, I think especially with Blizzard Entertainment, people seem to really go out and, keep trying to bring the real-time strategy genre back to life, which, look, as the Warcraft 3 player, I appreciate that. But, could you sort of talk about like the flaw, or I don't know, flaw, challenge? We're trying to find so many interesting words to talk about these variables today. Variables, another new word. What do you think goes through people's heads when they leave a studio and say, I'm going to make the game they always wanted to make? And why is that something that you guys avoided, I guess, if I'm extrapolating from this quote correctly?
Yeah, I mean, it'll be easier to talk about this if I kind of put up the, like, I'm just going to talk about my own point of view, my own experience. I don't necessarily want to project this out to like my collaborators and all that. But like, for me, I guess there's a couple of aspects to it, right? Like on the one hand, striking out to like start a studio and talk to, whatever, like an investor or a publisher partner or whatever, right? Like making that kind of business case. There's a level of, like doing business is storytelling, and you want to make the story make sense and be easy to understand, because effectively if you're pitching, right, you want the person on the other side of that call to be able to get a PDF of your pitch deck and go and tell your story. And the simpler that story is, the easier their job is, which makes it easier for you to get your thing done. And so purely from the point of view of like, I'm a Skyrim shaped developer with that on my resume or whatever, right? There would be a level of wisdom to be like, hey, like Soft Rains is going to make a open world RPG, and it's going to be better than, like whatever Bethesda's doing next. And there is a world where like, and I think you can find examples of that, where like that is a successful pitch, right? In order of getting a studio started. It's not always a successful pitch to get a studio started. It's certainly not always a successful pitch to get a studio to actually become the thing. So even when we were starting out, sort of like a self-inflicted, whatever, like, way of hampering ourselves was to not go out there and pitch super hard on like my resume or, one of our co-founders' resumes, specifically that like, hey, we're making this game that we worked on, but it's different. In terms of like for me, and kind of what like Steve and I were talking about in LA, it's like, it's just like the type of creative person I am. I legitimately don't have that. I've been waiting since I was 17 to turn this thing from my calculus notebook into a real thing, right? Like bits and pieces and things I care about. But what I've realized,
I do want to see that calculus notebook if you still have it.
It's really like the half program games on the TI-83 from that class. That's
oh my god,
that's the artifact. But I, like there are things I come back to. There are things that I'm interested in, and like it'll be like flashes. But I'm not. I've never been and never thought of myself as like the sort of auteur. I have a fully formed thing. I'm just waiting for the team or the money or the time frame to do it. What I feel I've learned about myself, and at this point over 20 years of making games, is what I think I'm good at and what I really enjoy doing is collaborating with other people, getting to know them, their strengths, and the weaknesses that they want to get better at, weaknesses I can challenge them to get better at, the weaknesses they don't want to get better at and shouldn't be challenged at, and then kind of like finding the synthesis to kind of weave those together. And Ambrosia Sky for me is like, it is an expression of that journey of like, I was in the AAA environments where I was happiest and doing my best work. I also saw a reflection of this, right? So like, that's actually lessons from AAA. The lessons from AAA are occasionally like, this is how to build a level, or this is how to think about like doing a loot table or something, right? But they're often like more the soft skills of like, this is actually like how I think we kind of solve this design problem by marshaling somebody who actually is like outside of design and maybe a little uncomfortable, but like I think has a good mindset. And we're gonna like, let's throw that problem to this person, like that sort of thing. I think it's fun, and gets the best work out of me and the other folks I work with.
Yeah. There's something interesting in like, realizing that you're working in a creative medium and sort of going like, oh, like I started in this because I had, my brain buzzing full of, new ideas or, what feel like new ideas. And then you're in there and you go, oh, I haven't like had one of those like big I don't know, like big, you're 17 years old and all of a sudden you want to tell a story about like a multiversal universe that jumps between, all these kind of different characters you have in your head. No, I'm not describing my own work. Why would you ask? To where you go further along where you kind of go, oh, I know how to make a lot of interest, like small things, and then those become seeds for, what might become the multiversal thing with a bunch of your different original OCs. What's interesting is, and I desperately tried to keep generative AI, far from the, I don't want it to be every podcast I do to touch on it in some way, but there is like a perspective on generative AI technology, like that LLMs can get to a point where there's a prompt of like, oh, if you have an idea for a game, all you have to do is type it in and that's enough to make it. But I think what I'm hearing you describe is, like, you sort of almost can't have a game that way, right? Like sort of only a good game only comes because two people or more, 10,000 people, if you're at Ubisoft, sat together and hit things with hammers and sort of looked at the shape of it, and neither one of them having like a grand idea of what the thing was supposed to be. It might just be like, hey, like how the heck does this sword animation like supposed to work? Like what's the actual point where the frame, you should put in that smear frame or something. Like it sort of feels like I'm unfortunately don't know what it feels like, but it sort of feels like those two ideas are in conflict, right? Like the kind of way of making games you're describing, the idea that you could just straight put into the world, I have this grand vision for a game, and that it could just pop out of thin air.
I will say, is it okay if I respond real fast, Joel?
Please. I don't even know if it was a question. I was just rambling.
I will say, it's just like, I don't know why, I don't even know what I would get from being able to do that, right? Like, because for me, the act of making a game is, like, the craft is working with other people. It is finding out and learning from them and making something bigger than just myself that kind of, like, is better because it's not just my ideas. Like, for me, game development is, like, it is learning from each other. It is pushing and challenging each other, and that, like, the craft of it, the act of making games is so enjoyable. Even when it's difficult, it is enjoyable to be working creatively with other people on a thing we all care about, that we're all bringing, our different levels of expertise to. And like, there's challenge there, of course, but I think like it is the communal, the collaborative aspect that is so good about making a game that like, even if I could just press a button and say game done, it's like, there would be no joy in that for me, because the joy is the work. The joy is the being in something with somebody else and thinking it through and growing because of it. I'm a writer outside of games, and like even writing fiction and stuff like that is like, I still want I want editors, I want readers, I want other people to, help me figure out what it is that I care about saying. So.
Yeah. And we sort of, I sometimes feel like, it's easy to perceive, the joy you're talking about, the joy of working with other people, as something like, oh, that's something that emerges from the process that we built to make games, and that's good, but it doesn't necessarily translate to the audience. And it's like, in fact, no, like it's sort of the opposite, right? Is if you get really excited about like a line in something, and you may have to defend that line from a producer or someone else wanting to cut it because they don't like it, but you finally like, but even then, if you're collaborative about it, you sort of can build a case for it, and then you sort of help other people in your team understand that line. And I'm just going specifically a line here. This can go wide. And then, on the audience side, you'll be, watching a stream or reading feedback on Reddit, and someone will say, oh, this line. And like, that's the A to B, right? Like, that's a big example, but there are smaller examples of that, like all throughout the process. And I think, that's a part of the craft that, sits underneath, like GDC talks and even interviews like this, calling myself out a little here, when we go ask people like, oh, what was your secret? How did you do this? And someone can explain a really cool solution, but part of the cool solution was, two people banged on rocks together until they figured out what it looked like. And I think it's interesting that it's such a hard thing to talk about, I guess. And once again, I don't know where the question mark is at the end of the sentence.
It's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think let's not make this another podcast about AI, but, I think there's I'll try and be as neutral as possible, right? Like I have curiosities and concerns about generative AI. But I think like when you talk about like ideation and the kind of collaboration that comes from that, you're going to get people who are really knowledgeable about AI who will talk about like, hey, like language, like LLMs that are largely, pattern completion style models are inherently going to be derivative. And then like, oh, but like a reasoning model is going to be able to, like have new insights and innovations. And that may be true. And that might be where the tech is or is getting to be. But what I tend to think of is like, I think this is part of what you're talking about, Kate, is like, there's an element of like, well, what do I actually enjoy? Right. And like, I think as somebody who I do my best work in collaboration, like I'm not great in a vacuum. It's one reason why I'm not a solo developer, right? I could use an LLM as my sort of rubber duck to go bounce ideas off of. I know a lot of people who use generative models like do that and find it really useful for that. I have the luxury of not needing it to be my rubber duck, right? I have the luxury of having great collaborators who are really like specific and frankly don't have the huge robust training model that I think kind of flattens the curve of what that person is, right? So I know that like there are certain problems that I'm going to reason through that like, hey, I'm going to go talk to Darl about this one. I'm going to talk to Kate about this one. I'm going to talk to Sophie or Adam or whoever on our team about this one, right? So for me, where I am in my process, I don't really see that as a place where I need a surrogate, and I don't think I'm improved by a surrogate for it.
Yeah. I'm going to, speaking of other great people on your team, they supposedly say that generative AI can replace people, but I want to know who those people are before they're replaced. No. Okay. Please forgive my segue. I'd love to hear from each of you. Who is someone at Soft Reigns who hasn't gotten as much time in the limelight for Ambrosia Sky, who is doing something incredible, who is really helping make this game be as unique as it is? Like I want to know who they are. Who would you like to give a shout out to today?
It's hard because we could spend the rest of the time and more because, it's not like there are two people who are sort of deserving of that attention. I mean, like, I mean, Fiona and Thomas and Sophie and Christina and so many folks on our team. I mean, Trang, who's our head of ops, who like is so incredibly talented. Gosh, how do you?
I will point out the first time I asked this question, Mike Bithell 2 episodes back, 3 episodes back, I forget what order we're in. Mike Bithell, the first one I was doing the podcast with here this year, he went ahead and rattled off all the credits for Tron Catalyst. So he just read out the whole credits list. If you're inclined to, there's no limit really. You could just keep going. I can't stop you. I could stop you, but I won't stop you.
I mean, I want to answer the question in the spirit that I think it was asked. So I will choose somebody, but yes, I will hugely caveat that like everyone on the team is deserving of like a 30-minute exposition on why they're great, because we've constructed the team to invite that greatness. But it's easy for me to talk about Darrell Brigner, who is a colleague of mine from the Bethesda days. So like Darrell was hired onto the Fallout 3 team, which is the first Bethesda game that had like a dedicated level design team. And Darrell actually was like, he remained at Bethesda after I left, and he left Bethesda to come start Soft Reigns with us, right? So he was in a lead role on Starfield when he came and joined us. And I think that the reason why Darrell's name comes to mind is the way in which you asked it, is like somebody who gets a little less attention. Darrell is like one of these workhorse developers who, like, it's been characterized to me by colleagues as like, Darrell's the kind of person where like you point at a problem on the other side of a hill and you wake up the next morning expecting like a road around the hill, and he's actually like just bored a hole through the mountain. So I really love working with Darrell. He, by his personality, is the sort of person who doesn't really speak up much, doesn't really like claim credit much. But like when it's like, well, actually, you tend to listen to. And I think in an industry where, you know, like whatever, you know, charisma and magnetism often, perhaps too often, like equate to, gosh, I just called Darrell uncharismatic and unmagnetic. I don't mean that, buddy.
Oh, no.
But like, I think, you know, like too often success is linked to that, like, I'm going to fill the rear. I'm going to talk a lot, you know, like I'm doing now.
Yeah. The people who grab the limelight, we can say that. You can be charismatic and not go for the limelight, but the people who grab the limelight, like, unfortunately, like me, I have to just go ahead and call myself out here. I'm hosting a podcast. That's the limelight. But yeah, continue, Joel, please.
Well, I find that it's the thoughtful, soft-spoken person who has like really dwelled with a thing that I want to be around and I want to learn from. So it's really not just a call out of Darrell. It's like that is sort of an attribute that I think unifies a lot of people on our team, is like really being thoughtful and really being thorough. So yeah.
Return Kate.
Oh, there's so many. Our team is full of, like, genuinely is full of so many incredible, talented, weird people that it is hard, right? Because they all bring something so special and so unique and so weird to the game, and I cannot emphasize the weird enough. But I want to call out one of our concept artists, Isabel, who just does incredible, phenomenal work and gets thrown the weirdest challenges at her. Like, hey, can you do this thing that blends this, and this? And like, okay, go. And she just takes all of our inspirations and brings all of her unique background to it and just applies it in a way that like is never quite exactly what I'm expecting, but it is always better than anything I could have hoped for. And she just has such a depth of talent and knowledge, and I don't want to keep saying the word weird, but like really unique and specific references that just makes her work really shine and that you can just feel everywhere in the game. And I'm so lucky to have Isabel as a collaborator who also will just like sometimes have to field weird calls for me. It's like, hey, here's this world building thing. What do you think? How gothy can we go? Like, what do you think? And like just rolls with it exceptionally and pushes, right? Like Isabel also asks me so many really great questions about world building, about story, and just really interrogates how these things show up in the art that makes my work better, and that like I would not be doing the same stuff without her. So Isabel Lee is incredible.
We could go for another 30 minutes about the concept of weird and how, like, you know, you've got the weird, you've got the word, and how you know, we use it as a word to describe the aberrant, but it's kind of a giant chasm of a word, if you will. Oh my God, no, wait, hold on, I'm doing it again. We're talking about what words are and what words mean. We've done it 3 times this podcast. So instead, I'm going to ask you guys, when you look out at the broader game landscape, what out there, especially in a moment where everyone's a little feeling the pressure of, you know, the various forms, whatever you call it, the downturn has taken, layoffs, revenue, whatever. What has got you guys though excited about games? Like what, when you look out there, like there's this thing out there and you're like, God, I can't wait to play with that. God, I can't wait to play that game from someone else. I can't wait to make something with this. I can't wait to see what someone else does with it. Are there any cool examples of like what's got you guys inspired about games outside your team?
I mean, there's an easy one for me, and it's a little less of the like what's coming in a year or two, but it's really it's a game that I just played that I spent years being excited for, which was Skin Deep, right? So Blendo.
Oh yeah, I love Skin Deep. Yeah,
like Skin Deep for me, it's a really interesting game to play while making this game because there's some overlap and things that I hope Brendan and company will look generously upon as. No, we had this idea at the same time, honest. But I think it's like Blendo games broadly, and I think Skin Deep is just like the most current, most recent expression of it, show that there is like a perennial place for games with like a deep point of view. And when you talk about like, you know, the sort of like universe of Quadrilaw Cowboy and you know, all the games that Blendo has made over the years, there is a cohesion narratively to those worlds. There is a visual cohesion to it as well, but like there's like a deep systemic cohesion that is expressed through play. And the fact that like there's a place for games like that, big and large, or big and small, right? Where like something like, you know, Outer Wilds, something like Skin Deep, you know, just demonstrates that like, yes, games can be successful at different scales, but games and game creators can like continue exploring a space, making that space more and more and more rich, and not necessarily have to be as subject to the fickle winds of like what feels safe and what feels risky at the moment. Because, you know, as much as I think the industry is going through a change that, you know, may not be a loop, it may be changed forever in, you know, the coming decade. I think some of the like we can never go back is a bit of a mirage, right? It's a bit of a fearful fantasy that people have.
Yeah, I think for me it's the same thing, right? It's games that have that really unapologetic point of view that are really exciting to me. So games like 1,000 Times Resist, games like Clair Obscur Expedition 33, right? Like both of those games stand out to me in terms of like the sheer confidence in the vision and what they want to execute and how they do it. And there is just something that is so awe-inspiring about the way both those games just kind of commit to what they want to do, and they do it, right? And like I trust them, and I was there for the ride the entire way through and was never disappointed with the experience in either of them. And I think it's that kind of like deep confidence in your own perspective that we're seeing in some games that I'm really, really responding to, particularly in the types of stories we're seeing and the ways we're telling those stories.
Like, you know, I think a lot about conversations, you know, had with like, you know, Zelda Nelson Jr., Strange Scaffold, and like the approach to making games there about the, you know, I think the word confidence is what triggered me for Kate, but, you know, like Aggro Crab. And of course, you know, everybody who wants to make a LinkedIn post that makes them seem like an oracle is going to post about Peak right now, right? But like that is a chapter in a story with some consistency about like a team with a point of view about how they want to make games and the kinds of games that they want to make, and then like the confidence of like a thing. Like, oh, surprise, that was successful in like a huge way. Awesome. I'm really interested in your 10-point LinkedIn post about why it is. I'm interested in the team's pattern of decision making and who they are and what gives them the confidence to make the thing that is successful.
Yeah, I like that you guys just keep rattling off games, and I'm like, man, I love that game. So I don't know if that means I have good taste or if just these games are just that good that, you know, we can't help but talk about them, especially on LinkedIn posts, which is funny because you mentioned Peak, and also Clair Obscur was victim to that. And I apologize to listeners because we have now spent 3 podcasts talking about how Clair Obscur is just, and now Peak are brought up on these LinkedIn posts. LinkedIn posts and generative AI, the inadvertent recurring characters of the Game Developer Podcast. Joel, Caitlin, thank you so much for your time today. I suppose before we go, if people want to know more about Soft Rains and Ambrosia Sky, where's the best place for them to get info?
You can visit us on our website, softrains.games. Ambrosia Sky is able to be wishlisted on Steam, so please do that. And we're on Bluesky, Instagram, and Twitter right now.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. This is fun.
A huge thanks again to Kait and Joel for joining us today. It was great, not just talking about how to make unique and interesting games, but the value of doing it with people you know and trust. To learn more about Soft Rains and the game Ambrosia Sky, you can visit www.softrains.games, and you can wishlist Ambrosia Sky over on Steam. For more from us at Game Developer, be sure to visit www.gamedeveloper.com, follow us on major social platforms, and subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find me on Bluesky at bryantfrancis.me. Today's episode was edited by Pierre Landriau, and our theme music is by Mike Meehan. Thanks for listening. I can't wait to see what great games you come up with next.